It is difficult to imagine today, in an age saturated with information, what it meant for human consciousness to awaken for the first time. Yet somewhere in a vast span of history, there was an extraordinary moment when the human mind suddenly realized that it could step back from the world, contemplate itself, and ask questions that reached beyond survival. This moment took place in the 6th century BCE, a time that philosophers, historians, and mystics alike often describe as nothing less than miraculous. In the Mediterranean world, a man named Pythagoras was transforming numbers into metaphysics, discovering in mathematical harmony a blueprint for the cosmos. Parmenides, with a radical boldness that still startles readers today, declared that change itself might be an illusion, and Heraclitus, walking through the streets of Ephesus, whispered that everything flows, that nothing stands still, not even the soul that observes emotion. While these voices were rising in Greece, at the edge of the Himalayas, another figure was stepping onto a parallel path of inquiry. Siddhartha Gautama, whom history would later call the Buddha, was beginning to trace one of the most influential trajectories of thought the world has ever known. What unites these thinkers is not geography, not culture, not method, but the astonishing simultaneity of their awakening. It is as if humanity, scattered across distant continents, had suddenly reached a threshold, a point where thinking became more than a tool for domination or control. It became a quest for truth. The 6th century BCE marks the moment when human beings stopped merely inhabiting the world and started interrogating it. They questioned what lies beneath appearances, what endures behind the shifting surface of life, and what it means for a human being to exist within a universe that is infinitely larger, older, and more mysterious than anyone had imagined. This new sensitivity did not arise from technology, conquest, or prosperity. It emerged from introspection, from the recognition that the greatest frontier was not outside but within. To call this century miraculous is not an exaggeration. Never before had so many individuals, separated by language and landscape, asked questions of such depth. Never before had the human spirit pressed so intensely against the boundaries of its own understanding. And within this extraordinary constellation of minds, Siddhartha Gautama shines with a distinct luminosity. His insights would not be built upon geometry or logic, but upon the silent observation of suffering, impermanence, and the restlessness of the human heart. While Greece built the architecture of reason, the Buddha carved a path toward liberation. This is a stage on which the story of the Buddha begins. A world awakening, a species discovering its inner dimension, a century where ideas became instruments of transformation. It is here, in this shared dawn of philosophy, that Siddhartha's voice first rises, not as a prophet or a god, but as a human being who dared to look directly into the nature of existence. Before he became a spiritual guide, Siddhartha Gautama was a prince whose world had been meticulously edited by his father. Born into a royal lineage at the foot of the Himalayas, he entered life surrounded by every luxury imaginable: silk, music, banquets, servants. His days unfolded within the walls of a palace designed not merely to shelter him, but to shield him from the very texture of human existence. The king, terrified that his son might abandon political destiny for spiritual wandering, resolved to hide from him anything that might awaken compassion, fear, or metaphysical doubt. What Siddhartha received in childhood, therefore, was not simply wealth, but illusion. His world was curated like a perfect garden. No illness, no aging, no sorrow, no death. Anyone whose face carried the marks of pain was removed from his presence. His home was a theater of eternal youth, a stage where human fragility had been deliberately erased. And without contrast, he saw beauty but not its impermanence, pleasure but not its cost. The palace was less a home than a golden cocoon, an architecture built to prevent awareness. But reality, like a river pressing against a dam, eventually finds its way through. At 29, Siddhartha left the palace grounds, curious and unguarded, unaware that a single walk would undo the entire fabric of his upbringing. What he encountered on that day would later be remembered as a foresights, for apparitions that cracked open his understanding of life. First, he saw an old man, hunched and trembling, his body a fragile structure battling gravity. Siddhartha had never witnessed age before. The sight struck him with the force of prophecy. This is where youth leads. No matter how radiant a body begins, it bends. Next came a man ravaged by illness. The prince watched as pain distorted the stranger's gestures and breath. Disease was not an abstract concept anymore. It had a face, a sound, a weight. The perfection of the palace evaporated. The body, he realized, was not a fortress. It was a temporary arrangement of matter, vulnerable to collapse. Then he saw a funeral procession, carrying a corpse wrapped in cloth. Death, the event most carefully hidden from him, now stood in plain view. It was a final verdict on human existence. Everything that lives must end. Youth, beauty, strength, all dissolve into the same silence. For the first time, Siddhartha understood that nothing in his life had prepared him for the truth that governs all lives. Overwhelmed, he continued walking, and then came the fourth encounter. An ascetic, a wandering monk who owned nothing, desired little, and carried serenity that contrasted sharply with the suffering Siddhartha had just witnessed. This figure did not flee from the world's harshness. He studied it. He practiced renunciation not out of despair, but out of clarity. In that moment, the prince glimpsed the possibility of another path, one that led neither toward luxury nor toward denial, but toward understanding. These four encounters did not simply inform Siddhartha. They shattered him. They punctured the dream his father had built and revealed the architecture of human existence, aging, illness, death, and the search for meaning. In their wake, the palace lost its luster. Protection felt like imprisonment, and the prince who had once been sheltered from suffering now felt compelled to confront it at its deepest root. When Siddhartha left the palace behind, he did not step into enlightenment. He stepped into a battlefield, one fought not with weapons, but with his own mind and body, determined to understand the roots of suffering. He sought out the most respected ascetics of his time, men who believed that liberation required the destruction of desire through the destruction of the flesh. Siddhartha embraced their methods with the same intensity he once applied to royal duties. If truth demanded sacrifice, he would not hesitate. In the forests and plains of northern India, he pushed his body to its limits. He fasted until his skin clung to his bones like worn fabric. He held his breath until stars flashed behind his eyelids. He meditated in cold and heat, unmoving for hours, testing the boundaries of physical endurance. Stories say that he became so thin that he could touch his spine by placing a hand on his stomach. Whether literal or symbolic, the image reveals a deeper truth. Siddhartha had turned his own body into a question, and suffering into an experiment. Yet the more he starved himself, the more he noticed a paradox. Pain did not liberate him from attachment. It merely replaced one form of attachment with another. The body became an obsession, not a gateway. His effort to transcend desire had become, ironically, a new kind of desire, a desire for control, for purity, for perfection. He was no longer enslaved by pleasure, but he was still enslaved. The chain had simply changed shape. One day, weakened to the edge of collapse, Siddhartha overheard a simple conversation, a teacher instructing a musician on how to tune a string. If the string is too tight, it snaps. If it is too loose, it makes no sound. The right tension is found in balance. This trivial exchange pierced him more deeply than years of fasting. It revealed what neither luxury nor self-inflicted torment had taught him. Truth lies between extremes. He realized that the life of indulgence he had known in the palace and the life of deprivation he had adopted in the forest were mirror images of the same error. Both were rooted in imbalance. Both were attempts to resist the natural rhythm of existence, one by drowning the senses, the other by suffocating them. Enlightenment, he now sensed, was not a destination reached by force, but a clarity that emerged from equilibrium. This insight marked a rupture. Siddhartha abandoned his ascetic practices, much to the disappointment of the monks who had once admired him. He accepted food again. He allowed his body to regain strength, and in doing so, he committed what was at the time a radical philosophical act. He dared to recognize that spiritual insight requires a mind capable of perceiving, not a body destroyed by discipline. From this realization, he articulated what would later become one of the central principles of Buddhism, the middle way, not a compromise between extremes, but profound reorientation, a path that avoids both hedonism and self-punishment, because both distort perception. The middle way proposes that wisdom is born when the mind is steady, when the senses are present but not tyrannical, when the body is respected but not worshipped. It was only after releasing the extremes that bound him, pleasure on one side, mortification on the other, that Siddhartha became capable of the moment that would later define him, the awakening under the Bodhi tree. When Siddhartha finally sat beneath the Bodhi tree, something profound crystallized within him. Enlightenment did not arrive as a revelation from the heavens, nor as a mystical trance. It came instead as a piercing clarity about the human condition, a clarity so simple, so direct, that its power lies precisely in its lack of ornament. These insights would become known as the Four Noble Truths, not commandments, not metaphysical speculations, but observations about existence itself. The first truth is disarmingly blunt. Life is suffering, dukkha. In the West, this statement is often misunderstood as pessimism, but in Sanskrit the word dukkha evokes a wheel whose axle is slightly off-center. Life still moves, but never smoothly. It creaks, wobbles, resists. Suffering is not merely pain. It is a constant instability of experience. Joy fades. Bodies age. Relationships shift. Even the moments we cherish contain within them the seed of their own ending. Dukkha is a reminder that nothing we grasp ever remains as we wish it to be. From this flows the second truth. Suffering arises from desire, not desire in the narrow sense of wanting material things, but the deeper craving for permanence. We want what is pleasant to stay, what is unpleasant to disappear, and what is uncertain to become predictable. We want stability in a universe made of motion. The tragedy is not that we desire, but that we cling. We try to force the world to behave according to our expectations, and when it inevitably refuses, we suffer. Desire is the friction between impermanence and attachment. The third truth introduces a rupture in this spiral. Suffering can cease. This is not a promise of paradise, not an escape into numbness. It is a recognition that if suffering arises from craving, then its end begins where craving dissolves. If the mind stops insisting that life should be different from what it is, the wheel stops wobbling. A profound stillness appears, not because life becomes perfect, but because we stop demanding perfection from life. The cessation of suffering is a shift in perception, a release of the grip that tightens each time we say, "This must not change." And finally, the fourth truth. There is a path leading to the end of suffering. This is crucial. The Buddha does not present liberation as an accident or a gift. It is a discipline, a way of living, a method for training the mind to see clearly. The noble path is not mystical. It is practical. It is built on ethics, attention, and insight. It teaches that wisdom is not born from belief, but from observation, not from withdrawal, but from understanding the world as it truly is. Together, these four truths form something like the geometry of human existence. They map the cycle of suffering with the precision of a physician diagnosing a disease. Diagnosis: life contains suffering. Cause: suffering arises from craving. Prognosis: suffering can be cured. Treatment: there is a path to that cure. But their power lies not in their structure. It lies in their honesty. They do not promise salvation from above or destiny from outside. They turn the gaze inward, suggesting that the greatest transformation begins not with changing the world, but with understanding the mind that interprets it. If there is one idea that quietly dissolves the foundations of how we usually experience the world, it is this: nothing endures. Impermanence and Nika is not a belief, not a doctrine, not a mystical claim. It is a simple description of reality, so obvious that we overlook it every day. Look long enough at anything, and you will see it shift. Mountains that seem eternal crumble grain by grain. Galaxies swirl into new shapes, collide, or vanish into darkness. Even the atoms that make up your body are restless. They dance, vibrate, transform, and decay. Stability is not the rule of the universe. It is the illusion we cling to because change terrifies us. But impermanence is not only written in the stars. It is written in us. Our thoughts drift like clouds that never repeat the same pattern. Our emotions rise and fall like tides governed by hidden moons. The desires that once felt permanent, intense, defining, urgent, eventually dissolve, replaced by others just as temporary. We are, moment after moment, a succession of beginnings and endings. Yesterday's self does not live inside today's body. Even the person you were 10 minutes ago has already vanished. leaving only a faint trace in memory. From this constant motion arises a conclusion that can feel unsettling. There is no fixed self, no unchanging me at the center of experience. Buddhism calls this anatta, the absence of a permanent ego. It does not mean that we do not exist. It means that we exist as processes, not as statues. We are not solid entities, but dynamic arrangements of sensations, memories, impulses, perceptions, and stories, none of which remain stable long enough to serve as a foundation for a permanent identity. And yet, despite this fluidity, we cling. We grasp at the people we love as if they could remain unchanged. We hold on to the image of who we believe we are, even when life pulls us in another direction. We want emotions to last, pleasure to linger, relationships to freeze in their happiest moments. We want the world to pause simply because we enjoy a particular configuration of it. But impermanence does not negotiate. The more tightly we try to hold, the more painful the letting go becomes. This is where suffering enters, not from change itself, but from our refusal to accept it. Impermanence is neutral. Our resistance is not. When we desire the unchanging, we wage war against the very nature of reality. The world moves. We demand it stay still. The result is friction, dukkha, the misalignment at the heart of human experience. To understand impermanence is not to become detached in a cold or distant way. It is to see beauty precisely because it is fragile. It is to love without clinging, to act without expecting permanence, to appreciate moments without imagining they must last forever in order to be meaningful. Impermanence does not impoverish life. It animates it. It turns every breath into a unique event, every encounter into a miracle of timing, every sunrise into something that has never happened before and will never happen again. To see impermanence clearly is to begin loosening the grip of the ego, for the ego is built on the fantasy of continuity. And in the gentle collapse of that fantasy, something remarkable appears, a spaciousness, a freedom, a capacity to move with the world rather than against it. When we stop clinging to what cannot remain, suffering begins to unravel, not because life stops changing, but because we finally stop insisting that it shouldn't. If impermanence reveals that nothing stays the same, the doctrine condition co-arising, pratitya reveals something even more radical. Nothing exists alone. Every phenomenon, from the smallest vibration of a particle to the most complex emotion in a human mind, comes into being only because countless other conditions converge at a precise moment. Existence is not a collection of separate things. It is a web of relationships pulsing with mutual influence. We often imagine the world as if it were made of independent objects, a tree, a person, a thought, a star. But Buddhism invites us to look closer. A tree is not a self-contained entity. It is a meeting point of sunlight, soil, rain, past seeds, microbial life, atmospheric cycles, time, gravity, and the death of previous plants. Remove any of these conditions, and the tree does not merely suffer, it becomes impossible. The seed does not create the tree. It is only one node in a vast network of causes and conditions. And each of those conditions is itself the result of other conditions, stretching backward into an infinite chain. This insight does not apply only to nature. It applies to us. Our personality, beliefs, fears, habits, and decisions do not arise from a solid inner core, but from a constant interplay of influences, genetic tendencies, childhood environments, cultural narratives, fleeting emotions, random encounters, memories, and even the tone of a stranger's voice. We are not singular beings moving through the world. We are crossroads where countless histories intersect. To say I am is, in this light, to acknowledge the entire universe of conditions that make this moment of I possible. The Buddha compared this interdependence to a spider's web, and the metaphor remains strikingly accurate. Tug on one thread, and the entire structure vibrates. Nothing happens in isolation. An action, a word, even a thought sends ripples outward, shaping conditions far beyond the immediate context. A gesture of kindness today may influence a decision years later. A careless remark may alter the trajectory of someone's life. The echoes of each moment extend in ways we cannot predict or control. This is why the notion of independence becomes an illusion. Nothing can declare itself self-created or self-sustaining. The flower needs a rain. The rain needs a cloud. The cloud needs the ocean, and the ocean depends on countless other forces. Likewise, consciousness depends on sensations. Sensations depend on the body depends on food depends on ecosystems, and ecosystems depend on cosmic processes. Existence is not a series of solitary events, but an ongoing choreography of mutual conditioning. To see this clearly is transformative. It dissolves arrogance. We are not self-made. It dissolves despair. We are never isolated. It dissolves the illusion of control. Everything is co-authored. And it dissolves the idea of blame or merit attached to a permanent self. Because the self itself is a temporary arrangement of countless conditions. Condition co-arising also has an ethical consequence. If every action reverberates through the web of reality, then nothing we do is trivial. Every thought nourishes or poisons the environment of other thoughts. Every intention becomes a thread woven into the collective fabric of the world. Responsibility, in this view, is not a moral burden, but a natural fact of interdependence. To perceive the world through this lens is to shift from seeing life as a collection of separate entities to seeing it as a dynamic ecology of causes and effects, each shaping the next. Nothing exists on its own. Everything exists with, through, and because of everything else. And in that realization, the boundary between self and world begins to dissolve, revealing a reality far more intricate and far more intimate than we ever imagined.